On this week's podcast, I speak to Paul Roos. Now, he needs no introduction whatsoever. He's a legend in AFL circles, and in particular coming out of those great Fitzroy days and Swans days. Roosy, what are we going to talk about today, mate? What's on?
Mate, I'm looking forward to chatting about what I'm doing now, the leadership, and I know in your space too, the leadership with Performance by Design, which is a company we talk about, culture and behaviours, and really excited. Last year I got involved in some events over in Fiji, which is Nurture Her, Nurture 360, which is the concept of that whole leader. How do I turn up at work every day with some great business acumen, great leadership skills, but also being able to look after myself from a health point of view.
You've got to listen to this podcast. It's interesting to see where Paul has evolved from a young man with the influence of his parents to where he is today and what gets him excited, what gets him up in the morning. We talk about his wife's Tammy and how she's helped his career along to where it is today. So if you want to hear more about this, come and listen to me, Mark Bouris, at The Mentor on podcast1.com.au. Paul Roos, welcome to The Mentor, mate, and excuse my voice.
No, that's all right, mate. I'll do all the talking. You just relax.
Thanks, mate. I got this from shouting out of the State of Origin on Sunday night. I was yelling and screaming so much in favour of New South Wales winning, I lost it. Mate, first and foremost, I'm a big fan of yours and have been for a long, long time. And again today I went and looked up your bio and it's ridiculously... it's just ridiculous in terms of all the stuff you've won, all the accolades you got for footy. But I want to ask you a question, because everyone who's listening to this will know who Paul Roos is and know all these accolades. But I want to ask you a question. Do you get to a point where you don't want to talk about your accolades, you want to talk about what you're doing as opposed to what you have done?
Yeah, I think when you do it, I'm sort of one that moves on pretty quick. It's funny, when you're part of creating something, you then want to move to the next stage. So it's pretty cool when people talk about it, but I honestly haven't watched much of my own games. I think 2005 grand final, I don't think I've watched that in its entirety. We watched the last quarter a couple of times. But you're right, it's when you live it and breathe it, you love it, you enjoy it, and you're proud of what you achieve, but it's always what's the next thing you want to get onto. And I don't look much in the rearview mirror other than to learn what I've learned and correct the things I've done wrong. That's the main reason I sort of look back. But I probably prefer to look forward more than looking back.
When you think about it, though, what a privilege that you've done so well. But when you do look back at it, you're only probably looking for the errors you made so you can learn from it for the future. I mean, I'm a little bit like people like to talk to me about the Wizard days, etc. And I'm similar. So I don't really want to talk about it in my own mind, but I do, because I think they deserve to hear you talk about it. I really do think people love to hear Paul Roos talk about the things he did when he played footy, going right back to the Fitzroy days, and when you coached footy, both at the Swans and at Fitzroy. I think that people do like to hear that, and we're not going to do that today because I'm on your camp, mate. I want to move forward. But it's an interesting concept. I was thinking about it when I was driving down here today. I was just thinking about that. I was thought to myself, Roosy probably doesn't want to talk about all that sort of stuff. And he probably only interested in what he's doing today, which is sort of similar to the way I think. Yet a lot of people hang off what it is you have done, I should say. And to some extent, I think people like you, it sounds a bit judgmental, owe it to the public to talk to them about it. Yeah,
I think you've got to be clear on what the message is. And I guess that's the art, isn't it? It's not the self-promotion. You've got to be careful, it's not self-promoting.
Well, it feels like it is a bit when you do.
Yeah, when you do it yourself, that's part of what you... So when the words are sort of coming out of your mouth, I find myself trying to filter them, saying, is this self-promotion or is this trying to teach someone what I've learned? And you're always treading a fine line between that, because you don't want to be seen as, I ran into that Paul Roos the other day, Jesus, he lived in the past and all he was talking about is that. So I'm more conscious of what I've learned, the lessons and the mistakes. And for that reason, I 100% agree. I agree. What I love now is actually taking those lessons from playing, but I also worked as well. I mean, I was really lucky, I guess, in a sense that from 1982 through to 1995 when I came up to Sydney, I pretty much worked as well. So I had a really good balance between working, playing footy, and then obviously coaching is a whole new level of leadership. So, I'm mindful of that. I think it's really important, but I enjoy that part of it. And hopefully when I do speak, hopefully people do think that's not that arrogant Paul Roos talking about what he did. He's trying to help me with a lesson and give him the wealth of his experience, because I agree. I think it's really important.
What do you think it's in your background, maybe from growing up? What do you think it is that has made you able to make that distinction in terms of what you just said, that those distinctions between showing off compared to, or as opposed to, actually informing others about things that helped you work and do the things you did successfully? What is it in your background? Is it something to do with your parents? Because with me, I know it's the reason I don't show off is out of guilt. It's a guilt thing coming back from my Catholic upbringing. Like, don't be a show off. You got tickets on yourself and all that sort of stuff. So I go out of my way not to show off. And consciously I do try to inform people. But what is it in your background?
I think it's role models. It's a good question. I probably was able to articulate. The good thing about writing a book is you sort of get all the stuff out of your brain and you start to think about what happened. And I think in writing a couple of books, I reckon I put into perspective, it was role modelling. It was no doubt. It was my parents. My dad was I had a really good combination of parents when I look back. Is my mum was super competitive. Like they were both tennis players and played other sports, but mainly tennis was their role. I remember my mum was just like super competitive. My dad was the consummate sportsman, and just the gentleman. I remember him being a gentleman. I think I was able to decipher between the two and say, well, that's what's right. But you can still be a gentleman and be really competitive. And then when I went down to Fitzroy, I was really lucky. I mean, and to your point, the best players at Fitzroy were the most humble, and I just reckon I learnt from them to say, well, you don't have to shout from the rooftops. Gary Wilson, Bernie Quinlan, Laurie Serafini, Mickey Conlon, all names that Fitzroy people would remember. They were really humble guys. And I think I was just lucky there to watch and learn and listen. In those formative years when you get into a sporting club, 19, 20, 21, you can either be kicked in the backside and put in your place, or, everyone promotes that sort of arrogance and self-promotion. I was really fortunate. The guys, the role models, there's no question it was role models. And then I realised, pretty early that if I was able to emulate those good players, as I said, I worked as well, which was great to go to work every day and, not read the paper and listen to everyone saying how good you are or how bad you are, depending on but get into another vocation and work and work and work. So that's, I'm really clear on that now that, I talk about leaders as being role models. If you want to run a business or if you want to, be an executive at a top firm, you've got to be a role model fundamentally first and foremost if you want to create a really good culture.
And I've often wanted to know too, by the way, are you a product of Fitzroy, not the club, but Fitzroy, the district?
So I grew up in Donvale and that was the zone. So I even though I barracked for Carlton, I knew that I was going to have, if I was good enough, you never really think then. And again, I think you were lucky too. Back in those days, you sort of already had a group of guys that you played with and against in junior footy. So you had this group that went down and they were a good group of kids too. So I got drafted out of, in that area of Doncaster, went down to Fitzroy when I was like 16 or 15 or something like that. So yeah, absolutely.
And what was the district? What is a district? A socio?
Well, what they did is they gave all the clubs must have been, turn of the century, would have been going back years and years. So whatever your area was, you had to go and play. So we were the eastern sort of suburbs of like Doncaster, Templestowe, Bulleen, all those areas, and then our country zone was sort of Warrnambool, Colac, Camperdown from memory. So you had two zones. You had a city zone and a country zone, and you really didn't have any choice. You got invited down. And as a kid, you didn't need a choice. You just got invited to play. Being a VFL team back then, you were just excited to get invited. So you didn't really care. As I said, I barracked for Carlton. I can't remember, very few of us probably barracked for Fitzroy. We were that excited to get down there and pull the Fitzroy jumper on. It didn't matter who you barracked for.
And did you ever get a boot in the arse? What sort of kid were you?
No, I was pretty good, but I do remember when I first went down and I remember running out and my first coach was Robert Walls. And, you always think you're pretty good when you get down to a footy club. And I remember just running out one night at the Junction Oval. It was an early training session and I got out there and I had my jumper hanging out, my socks round, and I don't even think I turned my boots, did my boots up and just run around thinking I'm like King Kong. I got the biggest spray of all time from the coach, Robert Walls. He said, get back inside, don't come out until you... And that was probably my first lesson in almost like personal brand. And the Fitzroy guys were really big on that, how you represent yourself, how you represent your club. And it sort of shocked me a bit. It was like, geez, I've been doing this since I was 12, running around a footy field with my socks down. So that was probably my first real introduction to the discipline of football and how serious things got at that level, something that I thought was really insignificant at that level, held a lot more, there's a lot more accountability around that.
It's interesting. I might ask you the same question as I've asked myself, but in terms of your public persona, Paul Roos to me is, as you described your two parents, without knowing you, like socially, I would say very competitive and a gentleman. And you played your career that way. You very rarely got in trouble on the football field. I mean, maybe once.
Yeah, well, I think I got reported once for swearing at an umpire and I got off for that. But yeah, and I think that's why...
Was that a conscious effort, though, to be that person?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always felt the rules were there for a reason. It was funny because, you would know back in that early era of the 80s, I mean, it was quite aggressive, rugby league, Australian rules football, and it was sort of seen as a bit of a badge of honour if you hit someone and got suspended. I was sort of completely opposite. I couldn't work out why that was sort of seen as tough or whatever. I always thought, isn't the rules there for a reason? Aren't you paid to be on the team? Aren't you there to contribute to your team? So it was an interesting sort of scenario when you played in those early 80s. And there's no doubt, my father's passed away since then, but one of the best things when I used to run into people who work with my dad was exactly what you just said. He said, geez, your dad was a gentleman. Say hello to your dad for me. I worked with him at the TNG. I worked with him. Gee, he was a gentleman. And that really, I guess as a son, I was really proud hearing that about my father. So again, you subconsciously work out how you're going to behave. It's not like I never remembered I'm going to be a gentleman or whatever, but it's a product, I think, of where you come from, what you do, and there's no doubt, that combination of mum and dad, I think that's the way I tended to play my footy. I think I was a really competitive player, but always played within the rules.
You're right, though. It's being a mug or a thug doesn't mean you're tough. I remember when obviously from New South Wales, and I'm more a rugby league supporter, and when I was a kid, maybe about 15, I got introduced to a rugby league player. His name was Kevin Ryan. He was known as, or his nickname was something to do with concrete. I can't quite remember, but some place where they made concrete, they named him after the place because he was a real hard bastard. He was a barrister, and he was an ex-boxer, and he played for St George in its wonder years, 11-year history, winning 11 grand finals in a row. Then he came to play for the Bulldogs, and I got introduced to him. And the thing that struck me was how kind and gentle and nice he was. But on the football field, he didn't take any backward steps. He didn't start anything, but he didn't take any backward steps. And I've always remembered Kevin Ryan as, they used to call him Candor, after the place called Candor out in the west of New South Wales where they make concrete. That was his nickname. And it's funny, that combination of being tough on the field but being a gentleman at the same time is, for me anyway, is quite a remarkable persona to have, for you to have. And I guess we always attribute personas to a large extent back to our parents. So that's, I'm glad I've asked you that question. It's something I've found out from you direct, that I suspected, but I never knew up front. And of course, that takes me into the leadership construct. Leadership is, as far as I'm concerned, all about being tough and meaningful and purposeful in everything you do, ruthless, but it doesn't necessarily follow that you have to be a bastard at it. And gentlemanly, if you can do it in a gentlemanly way, that's the best outcome. And that takes us to the leadership construct. So do you think, I know you've done a lot of things in your career that have got you to where you are today in your leadership mission, but if I jump straight back to your mum and dad and to the kid growing up watching your parents in a certain way, do you think was always going to be where you could have ultimately landed into leadership because of them?
Yeah, it's hard to tell, isn't it? I mean, it's a really good question. I sort of was a semi-leader. I think I was captain of a few clubs, and I was probably a reasonably popular kid because I was good at sport sort of thing, but I probably was never like the standout sort of leader. I was never the kid that sort of everyone followed or everyone said, do what he does or whatever. I think it was more, I think there's an innate sense of what's right and wrong and being a good leader, but I think I was smart. I think I was able to really pick up a lot of things along the way. There's no doubt that combination, as I said, of mum and dad was really important, but then going to Fitzroy, learning from those players, becoming captain of Fitzroy, making mistakes, doing things really well, working with the other senior players at Fitzroy, going through some really tough times. I think that helped as well. I mean, we were about to fold at the end of 1986, go to Brisbane. I remember as captain of the club, I'd get phone calls regularly from players saying, Roosy, I haven't got my money. What do you think I should do? I think I was thrust into a more of a leadership role because of the circumstances of Fitzroy, because we had to absorb a lot of different things that other clubs didn't have to observe. I remember at one stage, we sought a guarantee from the AFL that we needed their money paid, and we were going to not play in a game. We were going to strike, and I sort of was a ringleader of that because the other players were coming in and saying, Roosy, we're about to start the season. We don't know whether they're going to get paid. So I think those circumstances allowed me to think more around how am I going to look after my team? What do I do with my mates? What role do I play in that? So it's definitely a combination, but I think some of the things that I had to do as a captain then led me to really starting to think about it more. And then when I finished playing at the Sydney Swans in 1998, I didn't know that I was going to coach, but I wrote down those 25 points, what I liked about coaches, what I didn't. So clearly at that stage I was more thinking about it. I think early days you're just acting and role modelling and trying to do the right things. But that journey, probably 1998 when I sat down, that journey of playing really gave me a lot of tools to start think about what sort of leader I was going to be.
Are you suggesting that, or are you saying that there was a period of time when you were a player that you were probably more emulating and copying other people, what other people had done, in terms of leadership I'm talking about, being a leader, through necessity, but then at a later period when you came up to play in Sydney, at a later period, you started then to write things down, actually start to articulate in your own mind what good leaders, that is coaches I'm talking about, what good coaches can do or should do. I mean, so because there's a big view around, particularly in rugby league circles, that great coaches were not necessarily great footballers. In fact, the best coaches were not the best footballers, but they made great coaches of great leaders in teams and made teams become great.
Yeah.
In other words, I can think of one, Craig Bellamy, for example.
Yeah.
He was a very good first grader, but he wasn't like, Noel Kelly or any of the past greats. But he's one of the greatest rugby league coaches we've had, and he makes great leaders in teams. In fact, he gets the whole team to be leaders. Do you think there's any truth in that? Yeah,
there's no doubt that pivotal moment. Towards the end of my career, I started thinking more like a coach and started to think, because back in those days when I sort of finished, the interchange for AFL was more used just if someone got an injury. So I finished that last period of 1998, I sat on the bench a lot, and I really started to think in that stage, gee, what would I do if I was coaching the team? And I started to think more, because when you're a player, and I think I was a pretty good player, so you're not worried about whether you're going to get a game, and you're not. Your record
certainly says you're a pretty good player.
Yeah, but so you're thinking differently. You're thinking, about winning a best and fairest or doing something really great in your own career. So there's somewhat selfish, when you're a player, particularly if you've done some pretty good things. What I learned towards the end of my career, I started to think I wasn't guaranteed a game. So then I started to think, well, what's it like to be the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd player? So that was a really pivotal time leading into coaching, no question. Because then I had to start sitting there thinking, gee, what's that bloke sitting next to me thinking? He's been on the bench for the last 3 years and he's been in and out of the team. And, and then when I started writing down some stuff, it really was a catalyst because of that. I think if I had finished my career, as still that great player and getting a game every single week and not sitting on the bench, I don't know whether I would have been able to do that. I don't think I would have been able to articulate that. And then I wrote down those 25 points, and that was really important because I didn't ever want to forget what it was like to be a player. And I felt a lot of times, this wasn't a criticism necessarily, but I felt a lot of times coaches forgot what it was like to be in the trenches, forgot what it was like to be a player. And I really wanted to keep that. If I was ever going to coach, I really wanted to keep that connection with the players. So if I did coach and we lost, I wanted to be able to look at the sheet and go, okay, that's what they're thinking about. That, all right, now I've got to work out, they're as disappointed as I am. How do I get them up for the next week? So, it was really pivotal. And then I went overseas in 1999 and I lived with my wife's family, Tammy, and I went to the 49ers, the Denver Broncos, the Chicago Bulls, Chicago Bears, the Lakers, and travelled around and did a lot of research on what good teams were doing, what good leaders were doing. Again, I didn't know whether I'd ever coach, but I didn't want to waste that year not from a learning capacity. So that was a really important year as well to start to formulate, articulate, think about, okay, there. And a lot of it was sort of trying to validate what your own thoughts were. But that was great to be able to see what the Americans were doing in that space in that particular year.
Learning.
Yep.
Welcome back to The Mentor, and I'm here with Paul Roos, and we have been talking about a number of concepts that sort of brought about his mission in life, and we have been, and in particular, we've been talking about things like leadership. And what I want to ask you now, Paul, is you've just explained how you became quite thoughtful about what AFL or what Aussie rules held for you in the future after playing. And you said you articulated those thoughts about coaches in particular in writing. That's a pretty unusual thing, to be honest with you, for a footballer. I know lots of footballers, they don't normally do that sort of thing. You then went on let's call it a sabbatical, but you went over in America and you went and had to talk to all the experts. And again, I finished off the first half of this podcast by saying learning, because I think learning is a really important part of becoming better at what you are. But you also mentioned that you were with your wife's family, your wife, Tammy. Is that right?
Yep.
Tammy?
Yep.
And I noticed Tammy is what does Tammy do?
She's a meditation teacher, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tammy teaches mindfulness, I guess. Okay. What influence does that have on you? Because, to be frank with you, what you're talking about here is being mindful of who you are, what you're best at.
Yeah, absolutely.
What influence did Tammy have on you?
Yeah, we both started meditating, went to a course together actually some 20 years ago, and then Tammy went on and she's like an academic, so she's done a lot of research on meditation. She did an MBA, a master's, a doctorate on meditation and parapsychic psychology, so she's done a lot of research in that area. So she brings the academia side of it. And we introduced it to the Swans playing group in when I started in 2003. And I think you're right. I think it's really just about being present, about being mindful and about being thoughtful and about being here and now. So we did that with the players, didn't make it compulsory in 2003, but there's no coincidence that our better players were the ones that really took it up. Adam Goods, Jude Bolton, Brett Kirk, Craig Bolton, et cetera. Some of the younger guys did it as well. And then when we got to Melbourne, when I coached Melbourne, we did it, brought it in like as part of our program. And now it's much more the norm. But I think that's the thing. It's sort of the biggest thing that I sort of try and balance out with Tammy is she's the academic and talks about the science behind it, which is really, really good, but also the trust factor and what it does to you. And I try and sort of, I guess, debunk the myths around it. It really is just being still and just breathing and just, and I think there's also the other forms of meditation. I remember coming down from the box after we'd lost, and it's more of that, the conscious meditation where I just take a few deep breaths and before talking to the players. So it's not just the 10, 15, 5 minutes you spend, whether it's in your chair or on the bed or whatever, meditating. But I think there's other times in the day, and that's what I think that's what I've been able to do in my day-to-day work when I was coaching, is just be mindful, understand when the moment is to be really aggressive with the players, or attacking the players, not the right word, but be quite critical, but other times to be able to differentiate and say, no, I need to wrap their arms around them. And I think that's an important part of being a really good leader. So certainly the mindfulness piece, the meditation piece for Tammy and I has been extremely important over the journey of in my coaching career.
So do you think, but is Tammy, do you share with things with Tammy? I mean, I don't know, but is Tammy part of your business now? Or?
Yeah, absolutely,
okay,
yeah. And one of the things we're trying to do, I guess, and we'll get on to what I'm doing now, I think...
Well, what are you doing now? Tell me now.
Yeah, well, so I've got two companies now, which is one, Performance by Design, which is really about culture, behaviours, values, trying to set them up. What are the real behaviours that you want to, which is really what we did at Sydney, what we're able to do at Melbourne, articulate exactly how you want to behave. I talk a lot about being real process-driven, not so much about the outcome. How do you want to behave on a daily basis? So that's Performance by Design, and which I was really excited about. Last year I went to an event called Nurture Her in Fiji, which was 200 business women, small, medium business entrepreneur leaders in Fiji. I just went to talk. I went as a speaker, and Tammy went to speak on meditation. We had an amazing experience connecting with the ladies, listening to the speakers. Again, around that concept of leadership, but in health and wellness. There was early rise, get up and do yoga or go for a walk on the beach, meditation, then some amazing speakers. And then we got asked after Christmas to be part of that event as well, to buy into that company. So we're doing that. We've got 2 events, Nurture Her, Nurture 360, both in Fiji in October. But the great thing is pulling both those concepts together. The off-site version, which is taking them away, taking them on an island, getting great speakers in, talking to them about, how can I build better relationships, pure business stuff with some of the speakers, but also the wellness piece. So, I guess my biggest focus is on how do we become better leaders. And I think what I'm finding probably more through Performance by Design, a lot of the companies we're dealing with, a lot of the leaders just get there which is not a bad thing, it just happens that they're technically very good. They're transactional leaders and they're very good at what their job is. Suddenly they get this position, they look down, they're managing 30, 40, 50 people, but they haven't had that relationship component, that empathy, that ability to build a team. So I'm noticing a lot of that. And also I think we now know, one of the best quotes I've read just recently is, my health will determine the health of my business. So I think we've got to stop putting, as you and I well know, people will pay a fortune for a leadership speaker. Let's get, Mark, or let's get Paul to come along and we'll pay a fortune. Meditation or yoga, we'll leave that. My view, and I know you share this view, we've touched about it before, is how do we make this leader that's really well balanced, that looks after himself or herself really, really well, has a great understanding of the impact they're going to have on their staff, the energy, and also be technically very good at what they do. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do. So with Performance by Design and the Nurture Group, Nurture Her, Nurture 360 events, it's really exciting. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now and learning a lot too, because having been predominantly a coach, getting out into the corporate space has been fantastic and I'm loving it.
So, in terms of a routine, I mean, how important is a leader's routine? Because a leader's got to lead his team, but at the same time, a leader's got to live his or her life. Yep. And they've got to be in a right state of mind. If they're in a bad state of mind, their team's going to feel it or see it, one of the two. What is the routine that best suits you in order to stay in that right state of mind, in order to be a good leader? Yeah,
it's a good question. I mean, it really depends on what you do. I guess what I've learned when you're coaching, it's very routine-based, because you train the same time, you do the same thing. So I'd get up, meditate every morning, then get to work on the same time. But I think post that, and I suspect what you run into too, is when you're running different businesses and you're doing different things, it's a little bit harder because every day sort of changes. What my thing is, keep things relatively simple. You don't necessarily have to run a marathon in the morning. You don't have to go to the gym for 2 hours. You don't have to ride your bike for 4 hours down to Frankston and back. Keep it simple. Keep it something that you can do, you enjoy doing. And if you get that as part of your routine, you're more likely to keep on doing it. I think it's really individual. For me, I love going for a run, but I only go for a 15, 20-minute run. I enjoy working out. I've got a gym in the just a little gym in the garage, and I meditate pretty much every day. Keep it simple, because you're right. One of the things I wrote down in the 25 points at the end was the energy of the coach at the time was the coach. The energy of the coach will rub off on the players. So I was really, really conscious of that as a coach. If I walked in on a Monday, we'd had a loss and, I was miserable and yelling at everyone, what do you think? It's the same as in business, as you know. The leader has to be ready to lead. The leader has to, and it's tough, but that's the way it is. That's just the reality of being a leader of a team. So then if that's the case, then first and foremost, I believe you got to look after yourself. Look after yourself. Get yourself ready to go, whatever that looks like for you, but don't let it go. I think too often we sort of let it go and we spend too much time. I've got to worry about my team. I've got to worry about my company. I've got to worry about my players, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely. But if you can't worry about yourself and look after yourself first, it's very hard for you to look after them. So I think that for me, the message is always keep it really simple, something you enjoy doing and something you think you can turn into a routine.
And in terms of that proposition, are you doing that, do you think, for yourself, or are you doing that to be a good leader?
Both. I think they're linked. I mean, I do that because I enjoy it, but honestly, I believe that...
Because I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Too many people I know are doing it for themselves. They're leaders as well, but they're bashing themselves.
Yeah.
Because they feel as though they want to, tell everybody that they ran a marathon or they rode the
100%.
Fitzroy on the bike from wherever in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
Whereas you should be just doing it for yourself.
That's the ego, isn't it? It's sort of that first conversation we had. It's like you don't have to run a marathon so people can see you run a marathon. If you want to run a marathon, run a marathon. But the great quote, I remember, I think it was Dennis Pagan or one of those old school coaches. He said, you don't have to tell everyone you're a good player. Just play well.
Yeah.
Because you want to play well. And I think it's a really, really good point. Don't think you have to get on a bike for 4 hours because 20 of your mates do it. And you think, oh, geez, I've seen them ride down Beach Road. That's my message. Do what makes you happy. Do what you're going to turn into a routine. Not because someone else is going to look at it and say, oh, geez, I saw Mark Bouris run 10 times around the Centennial Park.
I better be doing the same.
Yeah, that's right. So whatever, it's a really good message. Whatever makes you, because if you enjoy it, people are going to see that enjoyment when you turn up to work. If you're doing something you don't really enjoy, but you're only doing it for someone else, you can only mask that charade for so long, and people are going to go, I don't even know whether Roosy enjoys doing what he's doing. Geez, he looks miserable when he comes to work. He's just run around the tan 3 times or whatever. Absolutely, 100% do it because you want to do it, and you enjoy doing it.
I think also I don't know, your wife would know a bit more about this than I do. I'm just making an observation, but it seems to me too that people who think like that, which you just said, when they are doing their run or they're just maybe going for a walk, to some extent they're actually performing a meditation of a type. And also, like I like to read something every day on top of something that's got nothing to do whatsoever with my training or my business. I like to read something that's out there, and also that becomes meditational for me. I reckon the part I was just saying before your wife knows, but I actually reckon that people who do these meditational things, like you just said, actually look a different way.
Yeah.
Their brain changes and their eyes look different and they have a different demeanour about their face. What do you think? Is there any truth in that?
No, absolutely. There's medical research around, certainly the brain, the brain waves, the brain patterns. I think it's even the size of the brain, Tammy tells me. So you're right, because part of it, I think it's a really good point. I like snow skiing. And one of the great things about snow skiing, all you're thinking about is what you're doing at the time, which is effectively...
Because you've got no choice.
Exactly. You're going to run into a tree. But you're present. And that's what we talked about before, that mindfulness. When you're walking and you're doing something you want to do, you're not thinking about your phone. You're not thinking about, what's going to happen at work or whatever. You're actually enjoying the surroundings of walking around the park or sitting by the pond feeding the ducks or whatever it might be. So part of that mindfulness is being present. And if you're doing something you like, you're more likely to be present than if you're doing something you don't like, because then you are thinking about other things. So it's a really good point in terms of, I mightn't actually want to sit there for 20 minutes and meditate specifically, but spend that 20 minutes doing an open meditation, if you like.
Is that what it's called? Like something where you're doing an activity where you're not actually sitting there listening to a meditation app? Are you talking about is it something else when you are meditating, when you're running or whatever it happens to be, you're doing walking through the garden or whatever it is? Is that called open meditation?
Well, I just put a label on it then, but I think it's more, I think for me it's more how do I talk about some of the benefits of meditation, just clearing out the stress, clearing your mind, getting your thoughts back in. So you can do that in other avenues, So if I'm snow skiing, I'm not thinking about anything else. So then I finish and I feel really present. You're looking around you, the snow and the trees and all those sorts of things. So I'm saying it's a form of meditation. I think, for whatever reason, we put labels and names on things. It's something Tammy and I have spoken about a lot, this notion of what is meditation. I think it's changing a bit, but certainly people think of meditation as, I've got to go into a cave and I've got to, sit there.
Dalai Lama.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas I think the ability you touched on before, it's mindfulness. It's just refocusing. It's breathing. It's just taking time for yourself. So that can happen in many different ways. I don't have the academia that Tammy does to explain exactly what a walk's going to do compared to 20 minutes of meditation is equivalent to 4 hours of sleep. I suspect that's different when you're walking around the park. But what I'm saying is what you're saying as well is take the time, enjoy what you're doing. If you had a stressful day at work, you don't want to be going home and getting on the thing, getting on your computer or whatever. Take 10 minutes, take 15 to walk the dog down the park. Then when you come back, you're much better equipped to be able to deal with those problems.
So how do you take this then into your leadership courses that you're running and the retreats that you're doing? How do you take all of these things?
Yep.
Because when leadership is sort of like the outcome. It's all the little steps on the way to becoming a leader that you're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I think what I'm really probably gets back to your question before. What are the things I'm trying to pass on? Because I think they're great lessons as opposed to tell everyone what I've done and how good I am, sort of thing. I think what I've been able to articulate is I think being the type of leader I was, I needed to do certain things to be able to do it. So what I try to say to people is, you don't need to go on a radical diet. You don't need to do enormous amounts, but just little things that's going to help you be a better leader. So how do we do it at the retreats and Nurture Her, Nurture 360? We start the day with some activity. We sort of say, let's get up. We'll do a walk on the beach. Some people will swim on the beach. Some people that are more active might do a yoga class. Some people might do a nice fitness class. Go and have breakfast. Tammy will do a short 5-minute, 10-minute meditation. Then we go into the business component. In the afternoon, it's the networking. How do I sit there? Geez, I've got an opportunity to sit down with some of the speakers. We do some one-on-one breakouts. So you're right. It's the whole of. So we're trying to integrate this whole notion of being a great leader, not just the. There's going to be some technical expertise. There's going to be some expertise. For instance, Nam Baldwin's a great stress management. Breathing. How do I breathe at work?
The funny thing is, just that breathing's quite important.
It's very important.
People forget to breathe.
People forget to breathe and breathing properly. I haven't done his course, but I believe he does an amazing job. So, to your point, it's how do I take my learnings and things that I think fundamentally people know, but it's just reinforcing what they are. Great business speakers, great speakers on leadership, and great speakers on wellness. Get to an off-site venue. So you are, I've been to some great conferences. You and I have been to some conferences together, but they tend to be just purely business sort of conferences. Yeah. And then you sort of, that was great, but I better check my phone.
Yeah, correct. Well, you seem checking your phone when you're talking.
That's exactly. So the great thing about what I found last year going to Fiji with the Nurture Her was everyone was engaged. You're in this beautiful, and you're not thinking about what's happening at work. You're actually being mindful. You're being present at that particular time. So you're more likely to take in the information as you possibly can. The performance by design is really, we're sort of trying to get some, uptake around.
Is that one-on-ones or is that corporate more?
That's more corporate, more teams. So we'll typically work purpose, values, and behaviours. Most companies have a purpose and values, but a lot of them don't go down that next level to behaviours.
How to behave around the purpose.
How to behave around the values. Yeah, the value might be, we might have a value, you and I, and we say integrity, but integrity might look slightly different to you than it does to me. If we put something underneath it and we start to say, well, this is integrity, whatever that behaviour might be, and we'll determine it, then we've got a way to reward. Mark, well done yesterday. You were X, Y, Z. I thought the way you handled yourself in that meeting was fantastic. Oh, Roosy, well, thanks for that. So you're starting to be able to, so they're quite separate but similar.
Well, do you run like hackathons for businesses where you hack into values of the business but get everyone in the business involved?
Yeah, we get everyone involved. So the best part of it is, and actually the best people to work with are when they're smaller companies, because then you can actually, and you would have seen it many, many times. I mean, how many times a company goes, well, I started off with me and my 3 mates and we started this company. Now we've got 200 people. Geez, we haven't got any values. We're not sure. We're going along pretty well. That's actually the best time to do it. When you're actually a smaller business, you can sit around, what's our purpose? Why do we exist? What are we here? What do we come in every day to do? These are some of the values, and this is the way we're going to behave. And then what the good thing about that is you can start to hire and fire on those principles. You can start. So suddenly when you go from 20 or 10 or 15 up to 150, most of the people in your organisation already have those same values and behaviours.
Do you get them to sign up for it? Do you suggest people sign up for it? Like, in other words, you establish these values and objectives?
Yeah, we'll get them to do it and own it. And then, so we'll typically start with a full day workshop, and we typically start and say, look, okay, you agree with it? Let's sit with it. We typically ask them to sit with those behaviours for 3 months. And then we'll come back and challenge them. What have you seen? And then we never want to put processes in place. That's up to them. But it's, for instance, communication. It's hard to have communication and then behaviours underneath it if you never have a meeting to communicate. So typically what happens is when we do ours, I'll say, oh, look, we need to have, maybe 8 o'clock every Wednesday we'll get together, we'll just sit down, we'll talk about the behaviours, we'll tick them off pretty quickly Friday afternoon. So we won't infringe on their processes or systems, but we will certainly challenge them. But we'll get them to sign up effectively with the behaviours. This is the way we're going to act. And then we'll work out ways to hold that when they reward each other and challenge. And effectively, what is your culture? It's what you reward and what you challenge. Really, that's what it is, and what you see people do. What are the habits of your business?
It's a great story, like it's funny. I think every business has a story, and I'm just sort of dragging out of your story about your business, but it's a great story that you put to us, me and the listeners. You put to us about the kid with a competitive mother and a gentleman as a father, and I had no doubt he was competitive too, but there's some traits you picked out, and then all your massive career of playing football and coaching football, and into today sort of paying it forward, what you learnt in all those years, and again making a business out of it, but making it a business that really suits your personality. And what's been better about it from my point of view is you've done it with your wife. That's fantastic. Poor Roos, I could talk to you for hours, Roosy, but my voice is going to drop out any minute.
No worries, mate. Well done to get through it.
I really enjoyed this discussion because I learned something more about you than I wouldn't find out if I looked up Wikipedia or whatever, or just Googled you. But what I found interesting about this whole conversation, not only about your new businesses, it's Performance by Design.
Performance by Design is the leadership company,
and
Nurture Her and Nurture 360.
Yeah, those three businesses. But I found out how something like mindfulness and meditation and just generally being kind to yourself works for someone like you, who, to be frank with you, I never really expected. I just thought I was going to get the footy thing, and I didn't get that. I got something totally different. I have heard you speak before, but I think that was about 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
But this seems to me you've taken yourself to a whole new level. I'm not saying you've improved. I'm not saying that. You're great then too, but you've gone to a whole new level. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I do. I really enjoyed, as I said, getting out of the football. As you said, I still do Fox Footy, but I've enjoyed being out of the football environment, and I've really enjoyed being in the corporate space more, and I've really enjoyed interacting with CEOs and small business owners and all those sort of people, because they've taught me a lot as well. And I think that lends itself, you talked about learning before, and people ask me a lot about mentors, et cetera, but look, you can learn from everyone. I think that's my biggest message. Don't sort of wait to run into a Mark Bouris or run into Paul Roos or someone like that. Learn from all these people along the way. And I've probably learnt more in the last sort of 2.5 years since I finished coaching Melbourne than perhaps I did in the previous 5 or 6 after I'd had that initial period of coaching. I learned a lot in my first period of coaching Sydney, but I think the last 3 years have been great because I haven't sort of